Two high-level US officials are meeting with Saudi officials in Riyadh today as the United States pushes a potential normalization agreement between Saudi Arabia and Israel, a deal that would be groundbreaking for this region. Of course, I'm coming to you from our Middle East programming hub here in Abu Dhabi. Now, the two officials are Brett McGurk, a US National Security Council official with years of experience in the Middle East and on policy, and Barbara Leaf, the State Department Assistant Secretary for the region. The meetings come a day after Palestinian officials reportedly visited the kingdom to discuss their demands from the Israelis if normalization with Riyadh moves ahead. That's according to the New York Times. Now, the White House National Security Advisor stressed that the trip is focused on broader regional issues, not just a normalization deal.
Normalization will be one of the topics on the agenda, but it's not the main thrust of this trip. And like I said before, with respect to the phone call Secretary Blinken made today, we don't expect any imminent announcements of breakthroughs in the period ahead.
Well, very much managing expectations, Jake Sullivan there, taking questions about the reason for the trip. The bulk of this reporting comes from my colleague CNN's Kylie Atwood, who joins me now live from the US State Department with more details. And it's important to point out here that this normalization deal that the US is so enthusiastic about between the Saudis and the Israelis, which would extend what is known as the Abraham Accord, sits, as we understand it, Kylie, as a pillar of a Biden administration Middle East policy going forward. Jake Sullivan there very much managing expectations on this. So what do we know at this point?
Yeah, well, Becky, there's a lot of pieces to what would be this potential normalization agreement between Saudi Arabia and Israel. And because of that, there are incredible number of complexities that go into this. It's not just about, the U.S. sitting down with Saudi Arabia to develop a pathway forward, but it's also the U.S. sitting down with Israel to figure out what Israel can do. The Israelis also figuring out what they can do for the Palestinians to make sure the Palestinians feel like they're getting something out of this. What a security agreement between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia would look like as part of this. The backdrop also being Saudi-China relations right now. What can the U.S. do to get closer to Saudi Arabia as part of this deal and pull them a little bit further away from China? So there's so many elements to this. And what we're seeing this week is a flurry of engagements that appear to indicate that things are moving forward. Now, as you said, the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, said that this trip by Brett McGurk, by Barbara Leaf, two top officials in the administration for Middle East policy at the National Security Council and at the State Department, their trip to Saudi Arabia isn't just about talking about the potential for normalization agreement between Israel and Saudi Arabia, but they also aren't saying that isn't on the agenda, right? And so we know that this is something that the administration officials are really privately focused on in the next year, what could be the last year, really, of the Biden administration. And so one of the critical pieces to all of this, as you noted, is that the Palestinians are actually engaging this go-round. They, in the last round of Abraham Accord normalization agreements, they really didn't engage. They were frustrated. They felt that engaging wouldn't be beneficial to them. And now they are seeing that there could be room for them to get something out of it. According to the New York Times, as you said, they were in Saudi Arabia for meetings yesterday, the day before this delegation of U.S. officials is in Saudi Arabia. Right. So there are a lot of pieces to this, but it does appear that this flurry of engagement could be pushing things forward right now.
Yeah, and you're right to point out what's in this for the Palestinians, because Saudi Arabia has said without a future pathway for the Palestinians, they will not normalize with Israel. We know that Secretary of State Antony Blinken spoke Tuesday to Mahmoud Abbas, who is, of course, the head of the Palestinian Authority. Do we know what they discussed?
Yeah, so the State Department put out a readout of that call. It did not at all talk talk about the normalization conversation between Israel and Saudi Arabia, but I do want to read to you what they did include in that readout, saying, quote, Blinken expressed continued concern about ongoing violence in the West Bank. He reaffirmed U.S. support for measures to advance freedom and security and improve the quality of life for the Palestinian people. The Secretary and President Abbas discussed their support for a two-state solution and opposition to actions endangering its viability. And that's the key phrase there, opposition to actions endangering its viability. It appears that the U.S. could be trying to see, what the Palestinians would want as part of this normalization agreement, what commitments from Israel they would be seeking if they're going to give the green light and essentially allow or give their support to Saudi Arabia going forth with this normalization.